Okay, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful that we have this opportunity to study together, to share the things that we are studying ourselves, and to be encouraged in the time that we're living. We ask, Lord, that you can give us light and understanding. And we pray for each person who is following these studies and those that are searching for truth. We just ask, Lord, that your angels can be about them, that your Holy Spirit can speak to their hearts. May your Holy Spirit be here now as we open your word together. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. So we're going to look at Crozier's article from the Daystar Extra, February 7th, 1846. And just before we look at that, though, I'm going to share it on the screen. And I do have the original, or at least not the original, but but it's a little bit easier to read this document and to search it. So we know that Ellen White makes a comment about this Daystar Extra, that she recommends it to every saint, and that it contains the truth in regard to the sanctuary, that is Christ's work. It explains their disappointment. Now, we know that Crozier was a friend of Hiram Edson's, and Hiram Edson, one of the persons that he shared his cornfield vision with, was Crozier, and they actually studied together. So this work of Crozier's comes from, or at least is inspired from, the vision that Hiram Edson had. And also is connected with Hiram Edson's personal study. So Hiram Edson was one of the persons who was involved in this study that led to this Daystar Extra. Now, this is going to be almost a year and a half after the disappointment. And Crozier's not going to mention Hiram Edson's cornfield vision. He's just going to present the arguments from the scriptures. And there was a point that was made after July 18th that we didn't have anything like Hiram Edson's cornfield vision to explain our disappointment, and that we should have had that on July 19th. Now, of course, this was unreasonable on a few counts, and one is, why would we expect a vision in our time? We would need an explanation, or at least a start or an understanding of an explanation. And I tried to show that the explanation that God eventually led the Millerites to understand was actually tied up in the message that Snow gave. That is, Snow gave a message regarding the types. So the seed of the explanation of their disappointment, or the reason for their disappointment that they could understand, was already in the Midnight Cry message itself. But their understanding had to develop. This had to be unfolded. And not everybody then just received, it wasn't like October 23rd, Hiram Edson has a vision, tells everyone about it, and then everyone receives this explanation. That's not what happened. And that was sort of the suggestion of what should have happened on July 19th. Now, I made a case that we had already had an explanation of our disappointment in the 777 chiastic structure. And this was a chiastic structure that went all the way back to December 21st, 2012. And it is also connected with the 622 symbol, that is June 22nd, that Jeff had, and I went through and explained this whole thing prior to July 18th. So on July 19th, we already knew that our prediction was meant to fail, and that it was not a failure in the sense that we should never have made that prediction. But you can see you're going to have a year and a half for them to finally get this explanation in place with the Daystar Extra. And we have a similar, with this movement, we have an explanation that should be understood, but not everyone is accepting it. And I believe that the thing that we have to come to unity upon in this movement is an understanding of what July 18th was about, just like the Millerites needed to understand October 22nd. Now, in studying the foundation, Jeff addressed in Notebook 1 the daily. And what we did is we went from Notebook 1 and we began to look at the daily ourselves, to study it out, to try to understand this new view of the daily and how it has tried to usurp the pioneer view. And in doing so, we were led to Ellen White's manuscript that was October 23rd, 1850. Now it shows up in early writings as September 23rd. And I'm thoroughly convinced that the correct date should be October 23rd, that it's not some part of the September 23rd vision that's just inserted there. And so I've carefully gone through all the documents that I have access to. There are more documents. There's like a manuscript 9 that I don't have access to. It's supposed to be just another copy of manuscript 15. But why, they don't include it on the disc, I don't know. Maybe they just think it's redundant. But so I wrote the E.G. White Estates and asked about this. Now, of course, we have these two dates, October 23rd and September 23rd, and both of them are significant. Now, September 23rd is significant. For what reason? Does anybody know what the significance of September 23rd is?
Well, September 23rd, 2017 was when you first began to present Samuel Snow's letters, which was 777 days before November 9th.
Okay.
And there's also a false prophecy connected with that date, which was to do with the Revelation chapter 12 vision of the woman standing on the moon with the stars, 12 stars above her head.
Yeah, so September 23rd has three major significances of it, and we could say a fourth. So as you pointed out, I'm presenting at Lambert Church July 18th as a symbol of the prediction before midnight. Now, I'd been presenting Samuel Snow's letters the previous couple of weeks at the School of the Prophets, but it's that I presented at Lambert Church 777 days before November 9th, 2019. So the significance of that date as a symbol, because I already knew that it came from early writings, and that it's 777 days before November 9th, can't be ignored. But it's also a failed prediction of the evangelicals, though I think that they are correct as far as the understanding of what that sign is. That's the Revelation 12 sign prophecy. So anybody interested in that, you can just go to Wikipedia. The Wikipedia is going to give you an explanation of it that's not quite correct, but it gives you a start of where to look, because they try to say that it's something that happens all the time, but not all the details happen all the time. So when it occurs, and in connection to the biblical calendar, all these things are really, really important. Then we have September 23rd in Millerite history is the Day of Atonement, according to the Rabbinic and Karaite Jews. So that is significant. Now, the fact that it's then October 23rd, that early writings visions is going to be corrected to, connects this failed prediction, the symbol of July 18th, the September 23rd Day of Atonement, which is the incorrect one. This all ties into symbols that are connected with Millerite history. So these are significant. The other point is that 723 contains the symbols that we use for March 27th, the 273. So it's in a different order, but it's an iteration of that. So all those things become significant. Now, as far as February 7th, 1846, is there any significance in what we see in this date? Has anybody ever looked at it?
I can't say that I have.
Okay, so, I don't know how many people are going to do this type of thing, but I think there's a significance in it. Now, on the rabbinic calendar, it's the 11th month, the 11th day. It's also interesting that in the Mayan long count calendar, it's 12, 11, 10, 12, 12. So it's got a lot of 11s and 12s and 10s in it. It's the 10th day of the 11th month on the biblical calendar. So, and it's one day past my birthday, though, I wasn't born back then, but, my birthday is February 6th, which becomes part of this structure of the 777 chiasm. So there's something about this February 7th, 1846. And I always thought about it. I mean, first time I ever heard of it, just in the relationship to my birthday, just being one day past my birthday, I always thought that was interesting. Now, it's 473 days past October 22nd, 1844. If that's significant, 473 is, I think 473 is connected somehow with something. I can't remember what it is. And there's some other thing I can't remember connected with it. I'm going to have to think about it again. So there is something about the timing of it as well, of when it's occurring, and I can't remember what that was. So I'm going to have to think about that again. But anyway, we have this, it is a Sabbath. So it's Sabbath, February 7th, 1846. And we're going to have this, this explanation of the disappointment. And so we would have to take this, which Ellen White has endorsed, as significant. Now, the next point is you're going to see this article by, which one is it? No, it's not the right one. It's there's an article by someone here, and I have to find it, and I don't know if I might have closed it. So it's going to be by, I don't think it's in this one. Yeah, so I need to find that article. Just hang on a second. It's going to be by Kaiser as well. Oh, here it is. This is the one it's not by, yeah, it's by Kaiser. This is an article that he wrote called Guilt by Association, Why Sabbatarian Adventists Rejected ORL's Crozier's Interpretation of the Talmud in Daniel 8. This is an extremely misleading article. If I was, professor marking this guy's research, I would have to give him a failure. It is pretty bad, the type of research that he does. Very, very shoddy work. But of course, the people who are looking at this, because this is a PhD candidate paper, so this was part of his work for his PhD. And he's going to make this argument that Crozier was teaching a view. Let me see if I can even. Okay, I'll just read his introduction here. The apocalyptic prophecies of the Bible and the understanding of Christ's heavenly sanctuary service are an inseparable part of Seventh-day Adventist theology. They shape the church's self-understanding and mission. Now, I always find this kind of interesting, the way that modern scholarship looks at this. They look at this understanding as just something that shaped us, right? So when they say this understanding of the heavenly sanctuary service are important, it's important only because it's something that helped shape us. It's not something that we still believe. And you'll see this idea again and again in the modern scholarship within Adventism. If they're going to put any importance upon it, it's not the kind of importance that we would put upon it. We wouldn't just accept. They don't just accept that this is true. They think it's part of a development of something. So it says one of the key words at that passage is the term tamid, daily, perpetual, continual, which is described in that passage as having been taken away and replaced with another service by the little horn power and restored after 2300 evenings mornings. The correct meaning of the term was at the core of a conflict during the first decades of the 20th century. So they're going to be he's talking there about what happened when the new view of the daily came in. It could have split the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Some interpreted the Talmud as Roman paganism, where others argued that it referred to Christ's ministration in the heavenly sanctuary. The topic itself did not seem to carry weight, yet its potential ramifications for the authority of Ellen White's writings and the belief in the divine guidance of the Seventh-day Adventist Church movement, or Seventh-day Adventist movement, seem to attach much importance to the specific identification of the Talmud. While several scholars have attempted to clarify the factors that were involved in and contributed to the 20th century conflict over the meaning of the Talmud, only a few writers have wrestled with the question of how Adventists initially viewed the term at the beginning of the movement back in the 19th century. The few who tried to answer that question unanimously assumed that O.R.L. Crozier's article in the Daystar Extra of February 7th, 1846, promoted the interpretation of the Talmud as Christ's continual high priestly ministry in heaven, in contrast to the Millerite interpretation of the Talmud as Roman paganism. Given that the article was recommended, it's got all his references here, by Joseph Bates, James White, and his wife Ellen G. White, that it was reprinted several times by James White, and that in 1854, Uriah Smith expounded on Crozier's interpretation of the Talmud. Previous scholars have further reasoned that the Sabbatarian Adventists of the mid-19th century must have endorsed Crozier's redefinition of the Talmud. Now, the first thing is he's going to argue to somewhat to the same side of things. So he's going to say here something that I just don't really understand how these people think. But anyway, however, the assumption that Crozier's view was widely embraced is problematic. For all acknowledge that the old Millerite view of the Talmud as Roman paganism was the primary view several decades later, at the beginning of the 20th century, when new controversy arose over the meaning of the term. If Adventists had already embraced Crozier's new view in the mid-19th century, it is difficult to see how the denomination would have reverted back to the old view by the beginning of the new century. To account for this point, some writers have suggested that both views were present in the Adventism right from the beginning, with James White being the proponent of Crozier's view and Uriah Smith as the promoter of William Miller's interpretation. According to this explanation, although a small pocket of Sabbatarian Adventist leadership embraced Crozier's view, Smith's thoughts and critical and practical on the book of Daniel and Revelation, or the book of Daniel, I think it is, 1873, had a big impact on the wider Sabbatarian Adventist body that his view remained the dominant position within the movement until the 20th century. So what he's saying is that Crozier was presenting something akin to the new view, and that some people have the view that Adventists accepted Crozier's view at the beginning, but somehow reverted back to the pre-Crozier view, the early Millerite view. Now, so he's already stating as a given that Crozier was teaching something akin to the new view. And this is kind of accepted, that Crozier has this view of the Talmud, and that is in agreement with the new view. And we're just going to see that this isn't true at all, that Crozier is not teaching anything like the new view. So he says the question that remains then is to what degree Sabbatarian Adventists embraced Crozier's view of the Talmud in the mid-19th century. Well, Crozier's view of the Talmud is not, as we're going to find out, not what he's making it out to be. By doing this type of work, where you argue with these premises that are never examined, is very typical of modern scholarship and scientific papers and so forth. People never get down to the real problem. That is, they always keep on building upon assumptions that have gone before, or work that's gone before, and never really examine whether this is even true. And this is what we've been doing, is going back and looking at things and trying to dig them up so that we can make sure that we understand them. And basically, Froome's interpretation is the interpretation that has just predominated. Nobody's ever examined critically in the scholarly world the assumptions made by Froome. They just keep repeating them. So he says the question remains then is to what degree Sabbatarian Adventists embraced Crozier's view of the Talmud in the mid-19th century. The present article will first take a close look at both Crozier's ambiguous and explicit statements regarding the Talmud of Daniel 8, 11, 13. Afterwards, it will examine statements from Sabbatarian Adventists that are the clearest in regard to the Talmud, and then move to the statements that are more ambiguous. Now, when you talk about something that's explicit or ambiguous, these are what I would call weasel words, in that, how do you decide whether something's ambiguous or explicit? Is there some objective way to measure the distinction?
Not really. They're very subjective.
Very, very subjective. And when something doesn't agree with you, what do you call it?
Ambiguous.
And when it agrees with you, what do you call it?
And it's explicit.
Right. So, and then he has all these underlying assumptions on how he's going to be interpreting these statements. So now he's going to talk about this age to come. So finally, the writings of the age to come Adventists will play a major role in this investigation. And the question is why? They have nothing to do with any of this. But of course, if you believe that the age to come Adventists are the ones who are using the daily for time setting, then it might have a part to play. But we've shown that that assumption is false, and that it's not anything that Ellen White is addressing. So, and he's going to talk about, he says in the last section, we'll point out the close association between Crozier and the age to come Adventists, and how Sabbatarian Adventists reacted to age to come Adventism and Crozier's interpretation of the Talmud. So what he's going to argue is that the reason they ended up rejecting Crozier's view, which ended up becoming the new view in the 1900s, is that Crozier was associated with this group, Age to Come, which is a precursor to Jehovah's Witnesses in a sort of indirect way. Some of the ideas there developed into what became Jehovah's Witnesses. So he's going to say, well, because it was associated with this group, because they were using this idea, then it was rejected. Of course, there's no similarity to what Crozier is saying, to what the Age to Come people are saying. And Crozier's association with the Age to Come Adventists is something that comes much later. And Crozier has quite a different view regarding what he wrote in 1846 when he's associated with the Age to Come Adventists than what, so there's no relationship to Crozier's statements in 1846 and his later involvement with the Age to Come movement. So many things here are wrong. There's just all of these assumptions that are made. And of course, this is scholarly work. This is what you do. You come up with some new theory to explain something, but you don't have to spend the time to prove all your premises because these are pretty much accepted because other people have already stated them. So all you have to do is say, well, some other scholar wrote about this and said this. So we're just going to assume this to be true. So he says, this article shows the Sabbatarian Adventists disregarded the Talmud aspect of Crozier's sanctuary view of Daniel 8, verse 11 to 14, because it seemed to be associated too closely with Age to Come Adventism, a ground for refusal that was no longer present by the turn of the century. So he's saying, by the time we get to the turn of the century, now the room has opened up for Adventists to accept this new view of the daily that Crozier had been teaching. So I'm not going to go through his whole paper, but you can just see here that we've already refuted a lot of what he's saying. But we can just simply go to Crozier's article and look at the fact that he never says anything about Hatamid, so you won't find any references to it. He will talk about the daily. So we're going to see what he says about the daily. So I'm just going to do a search here. Now, he's going to make some of the same arguments that the daily here is something referring to Christ's daily ministry. So what's Christ's daily ministry?
Currently, it would be his ministry in the most holy place.
Okay. Well, his work in the most holy place is not considered daily ministry. So
Then he's thinking of the time from AD 31 until 1844.
Okay, so when we think of the daily ministry, that would be the work in the holy place, would it not?
Okay.
Right? So we have the daily services. Those are done. So I'm just going to see where, okay, he says here, they're stated daily services performed in the holy and at the brazen altar in the court before the tabernacle consisted of a burnt offerings of 2 lambs, one in the morning and the other at even, with a meat or meal offering, which was 1/10 of ephah of flour, mingled with the 4th part of a hin of beaten oil, and a drink offering, which was 1/4 of a hin of strong wine. So he's just talking about the daily services in the sanctuary. He says, this did not atone for sins, either individually or collectively. The daily service described was a sort of continual intercession. By the making of atonement was a special work for which directions are given. Different words are used both in the Old Testament and New to express the same idea as atonement. Now, so I'm just quickly going through all these references to daily in his paper. The atonement which the priest made for the people in connection with their daily ministration was different from that made on the 10th day of the 7th month. So what he's going to do is he's going to make this distinction between the daily and the yearly. It should be distinctively remembered that the priest did not begin his duties till he obtained the blood of the victim. The blood of the victim, and that they were all performed in the court, the enclosure of the sanctuary, and that the atonement thus made was only for the forgiveness of sins. These points are expressly taught in this chapter, and the following one of the trespass offering. Here is an atonement to make which the priests only entered the holy, and to make it they could enter that apartment always or daily. But into the second, the Holy of Holies, went the high priest alone once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the heirs of the people. So he's quoting there from Hebrews chapter 8, or chapter 9, maybe, chapter 9. So then he talks here about national atonement, of which the Lord speaks particularly in Leviticus 16. And the Lord said unto Moses, speak unto Aaron, thy brother, that he come not at all times into the holy place within the veil, before the mercy seat, which is upon the ark, that he die not. For I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat, verse 2. For what purpose and when could he enter it? To make an atonement for all Israel, the whole nation, for all their sins once a year, on the 10th day of the 7th month. So Leviticus 16, that's 34 and 29. This was the most important day of the year, the whole nation having had their sins previously forgiven by the atonement made in the holy, now assemble about the sanctuary, while the high priest, attired in his holy garments for glory and beauty. Verse 4, Exodus 28, having golden bells on the hem of his robe and so forth. So we're going to see that what he's doing is he's making a distinction between the daily ministry and the holy. Now, the fact that he makes some arguments that people use when they try to say that the daily in Daniel chapter 8 refers to Christ's heavenly ministry by comparing it to the daily ministry that's being talked about in the book of Leviticus and other places in the scriptures is a false argument. Because what are they doing? What kind of logical fallacy are they making when they take the word daily in Daniel and they're taking his arguments where he's trying to show that the word daily refers to the daily ministration in the holy place? What kind of logical fallacy are they using? What are they doing with that word daily?
Well, they've already switched it from the daily opposition of paganism to the worship of the true God.
Yeah, so they're exchanging one definition for another that's in a completely different context. That is, nowhere are you going to see that Crozier is arguing that the daily in Daniel chapter 8 is referring to Christ's heavenly ministry as the daily. Right? So he's not making that argument. He's not saying anything even close to the new view. The only thing that he's doing is he's looking at the word daily and showing that it refers in the Bible, which it does, to the daily ministration that occurs in the holy place. And he's contrasting that with the yearly ministration that occurs in the most holy place. So you can go all through here, and he's not going to be talking about Hatamid in Daniel chapter 8, right? So he's going to talk here, the altar was the golden altar of incense in the holy, upon which the blood of the individual atonements was sprinkled during the daily ministration. Paul talks of the daily services in the holy and the yearly in the holy of holies. He says in Hebrews 9:8, the Holy Ghost, this signifying that the way into the holies was not yet made manifest while the first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure for the time then present, in which were offered gifts and sacrifices and so forth. until the time of Reformation. But Christ being come and a high priest of the good things to come by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, by his own blood, he entered into the holy things. So I'm not quite sure what he has here, Hod and Hagion. I think that's the way into the holies. So to the sanctuary. But anyway, the point is he's making a distinction here between holy and most holy ministration. And of course, this was the point that Seventh-day Adventists came to understand in Ellen White's day. They came to understand that there was a daily ministration in the holy place. And when did that begin?
AD 31.
Yeah, so in AD 31. And then in the most holy place, that's going to begin October 22nd, 1844, right? So we have this work that begins by Christ now. He's going to have a daily ministry just as the priest did in ancient Israel, in the literal tabernacle on earth. And Christ is also going to have a daily ministry and a holy ministry, or most holy ministry, so a yearly ministry in the most holy place. So the daily in the holy, the yearly in the most holy. This is the argument that he's making. So you can go all through his article and you're not going to find any argument addressing, Hatamid or anything like that. So I went all through it, and we can see here, if we go through it, you're just going to keep finding that none of this is going to be stating anything close to the new view on the daily. Now, I remember when I'd looked at this initially, when I first understood the daily and I looked at this argument, I didn't really understand what the daily was. I knew that it had something to do with paganism, but I didn't understand the arguments that were used in Daniel chapter 8. And so I superficially went through this article, and I thought, based upon what other people were saying about it, that Crozier was presenting something that was close to the new view of the daily. But that's because I was just looking at the arguments that he was making, that the daily refers to the ministry of the high priest. Now, excuse me. Here, thanks. So, what do you think is the problem here? Why can they get away with this? I mean, I'm trying to really understand how this has been framed in this way. I mean, because we could go through, if we look up, everything that he says about the yearly as well, we're just not going to find any arguments regarding Daniel chapter 8 that the daily there is some reference to Christ's ministry in the heavenly sanctuary. Now, is Christ ministering? Did he do a daily ministry in the heavenly sanctuary?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but that's what I would call a bait and switch, right? Is you're going to take this idea that Christ has a daily ministry, and you're going to say, well, then the daily must refer to Christ's heavenly ministry. But we know that Daniel 8 is referring to a counterfeit of both the earthly sanctuary and the heavenly sanctuary. So that the daily there is not a reference to the daily ministration of the priests, but to the counterfeit of the earthly sanctuary. That's the only logical conclusion that you could have if you're going to read Daniel chapter 8. There's nothing in what Crozier says that even hints at that. I'll just do another search here. So what I want to look for is what he says and his references to Daniel. Now he has 18 references to Daniel. Now he's going to say here, so this is near the end of his article. For what did he go to his father's house to prepare a place for you? Then it was unprepared. And when he has prepared it, he will come again and take us to himself. Again, Hebrews 9:23. It was therefore necessary that the patterns of things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. So this is in Hebrews chapter 9, Paul is making an argument that the blood of bulls and goats could not take away sin, but that the earthly things had to be cleansed. So also the heavenly things have to be cleansed. So he's taking this up, and he says, what were the patterns? The tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry, which constituted the worldly sanctuary, verse 1. What were the heavenly things themselves? The greater and more perfect tabernacle, and the good things and the holy things. These are all in heaven itself. For Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are a figure of the true, but into heaven itself. Here Paul shows that it was necessary to purify the heavenly things as it was to purify their patterns, the worldly. It was therefore necessary. Why? He has before been speaking of the daily ministration of the priests and its antitype, Christ's mediation of the new covenant for the redemption of the transgressions under the former, the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sanctified to the purifying of the flesh, but under the latter, the blood of Christ purges our conscience. Then verse 22, without shedding of blood is no remission. The necessity of cleansing the heavenly things is induced by the atonement being made therein by the blood of Christ for the remission of sins or forgiveness of sins and the purifying of our consciences. And almost all things are by the law purged with blood. The patterns were purified every year, and the blood of bulls and goats, with the blood of bulls and goats. But in the antitype of that yearly expiation, the heavenly things themselves must be purified with the blood of the better sacrifice of Christ himself once offered. This reconciles the things in heaven, Colossians 1:20, and cleanses the sanctuary of the new covenant. And then he quotes Daniel 8:14, or he references it. So in here, you're not going to see his reference to Daniel in describing the new view. Now he's going to again talk about the cleansing of the sanctuary. So he's going to talk about Daniel 8 in connection with the cleansing of the sanctuary. This is pretty standard Adventist understanding of Daniel 8. He's not focused on interpreting the daily in Daniel chapter 8. So you're going to, all through here, there's not references to anything addressing this problem, right? So he's not trying to define the daily in Daniel chapter 8. Now, he is going to have this one section here. So let's see what he says here in regard to 8 verse 11. But as we have been so long and industriously taught to look to the earth for the sanctuary, it may be proper to inquire, by what scriptural authority have we been thus taught? I can find none. If others can, let them produce it. Let it be remembered that the definition of the sanctuary is a holy or sacred place. In the earth, is Palestine such a place? Their entire contents answer no. Was Daniel so taught? Look at his vision, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, Daniel 8:11. The casting down was in the days and by the means of the Roman power. Therefore, the sanctuary of this text was not the earth nor Palestine, as the Millerites had taught, because the former was cast down at the fall more than 4,000 years, and the latter at the captivity more than 700 years, previous to the end of this passage, and neither by Roman agency. The sanctuary cast down is his against whom Rome magnified himself, which was the prince of the host, Jesus Christ. And Paul teaches that his sanctuary is in heaven, Again, Daniel 11, verse 30 to 31. Now, what is this argument that he's making here regarding the place of his sanctuary? So this is the closest that they can get to what they're trying to address.
Yeah, they can say that's a reference to Jerusalem and the temple there.
Okay, so, well, he says it's not Palestine, right? So he is making an argument that somehow the sanctuary in heaven is being cast down. Is he? Is that what he's saying? Okay, let's go back and read it again, what he says. But as we have been so long and industriously taught to look to the earth for the sanctuary, it may be proper to inquire, by what scriptural authority have we been thus taught? I can find none. If others can, let them produce it. Let it be remembered that the definition of the sanctuary is a holy or sacred place. Is the earth, is Palestine such a place? Their entire contents answer no. Was Daniel so taught? Look at his vision, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, Daniel 8:11. The casting down was in the days and by the means of the Roman power. Therefore, the sanctuary of this text was not the earth nor Palestine, as the Millerites had taught, because the former was cast down at the fall more than 4,000 years, and the latter at the captivity more than 700 years, previous to the event of this passage, and neither by Roman agency. So what is he saying the place of his sanctuary is? This is not heaven, is it?
It would almost seem like that was the application he was trying to make.
Well, yeah. So he says here, the sanctuary cast down in his, against whom Rome magnified himself, which was the prince of the host, Jesus Christ. And Paul teaches that his sanctuary is in heaven. Again, Daniel 11, 30 to 31. So he's going to say here, for the ships of Kittim shall come against him, therefore shall he be grieved and returned, and have indignation, the staff to chastise, against the holy covenant, Christianity. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them, priests and bishops, that forsake the holy covenant, and arms, civil and religious, shall stand on his part. And they, Rome, and those that forsake the holy covenant shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. So he says, what was this that Rome and the apostles of Christianity should jointly pollute? This combination was formed against the holy covenant, and it was the sanctuary that of that covenant they polluted, which they could do as well as to pollute the name of God. This was the same as profaning or blaspheming his name. In this case, in this sense, the political religious beast polluted the sanctuary and cast it down from its place in heaven. And he's going to give some verses. When they called Rome the holy city and installed the Pope there with the titles Lord God the Pope, Holy Father, head of the church, and there is the counterfeit temple of God, he professes to do what Jesus actually does in his sanctuary. So he is making an argument that is rather different than what is being done in the New View. So he's arguing that the setting up of the papacy in 538 is the polluting of the sanctuary of strength by this counterfeit ministry of the papacy. Is that clear? That's what he's doing. So is he talking about the taking away of the daily being Christ's sanctuary or ministration in heaven? Is he saying that? Is he undermining in any way that the daily is paganism?
No.
No. But is he arguing that the papacy is a counterfeit of Christ's sanctuary in heaven?
He is doing that.
Yeah. And is that correct?
True.
It's true, right? So he's not arguing the New View, because the New View is that the daily is Christ's ministry in the heavenly sanctuary. And Crozier isn't making that argument. What he is saying is that the papacy is a counterfeit of Christ's ministry in the heavenly sanctuary. And that we can agree with, because we've already shown that the daily is the counterfeit of the earthly sanctuary, and the transgression of desolation is the counterfeit of the heavenly sanctuary. And that's what he's arguing here, is he's arguing that it's the transgression of desolation that is the counterfeit of the heavenly sanctuary, not that the daily is the counterfeit of the heavenly sanctuary. So he's not presenting the new view, not even close to it. Now, he does have a slightly different interpretation of Daniel 8 than Miller had, but we're also coming to the view or the understanding that there's something about Miller's understanding of Daniel 8, verse 11 to 13 that is incomplete, right? And when it talks about the place of his sanctuary, they take that to be Rome. And we say, well, there's a problem there, right? That problem is that place doesn't refer to a pagan place, but to a sacred place. And that the primary application there that we're talking about is actually the destruction of Jerusalem. And you can see that by the interpretation later on in Daniel chapter 8. And also Daniel chapter 9. You're going to see that there's always this connection with the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, can it apply to the destruction of Rome? We argue it also can, because what we're looking at is the counterfeit over against the reality. So Daniel chapter 8 is addressing primarily the counterfeit. And so we can say that even in that verse, we can make two different applications. We can say that Rome's destruction is being talked about, as well as Jerusalem's destruction. But he now has another interpretation here. And could we argue that this is also a reference to the counterfeit Rome, or the new Rome, the papacy, polluting or casting down the place of Christ's sanctuary? Could we make that argument that it's a counterfeit of what's in heaven, and that also that this application is correct, that he's making here, but it's not the new view? Could we say that? I'm just asking the question. So let's take a look at the verse here of what he's arguing. So he's looking at the book of Daniel, and he's not addressing the daily. We don't find him addressing the daily at all in Daniel. But he's going to talk about verse 11, and he magnified himself to the prince of the host. Now, Rome magnifies himself to the prince of the host. So he's going to say that this is Rome. Now, it's not clear whether he applies it in both ways. That is, we know that when he magnifies himself against the prince of the host, that this is pagan Rome. But can we also say that papal Rome magnifies himself against the prince of the host?
Yes.
I would agree.
Yeah. Now it says, now from him the daily was taken away. Now, so we know that the daily was taken away from paganism, and it was given to papalism. Now he's not going to address this part. He's only going to address the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Now, the prince of the host has a sanctuary. Now, he has a sanctuary on earth. We know that sanctuary is going to be destroyed in 70 AD. And this is how we primarily look at least we looked at this as Rome, but we're arguing that this is primarily referring to the destruction of Jerusalem, because that's what's going to be addressed in the interpretation. It's going to talk about the destruction of Jerusalem by Rome. later on. But is the place of his sanctuary also cast down by the papacy? Now, we're not saying that, we're not taking the New View's position that the daily is referring to Christ's heavenly ministry, because that wouldn't follow. But we can see that the papacy ends up taking this paganism and it's going to baptize it. And when it baptizes paganism, it's then going to set itself up as the true worship, and it's a counterfeit of the heavenly sanctuary. And we can all agree that the papacy is not counterfeiting the earthly sanctuary as paganism did, but it's counterfeiting the heavenly sanctuary. It doesn't have animal sacrifices. It takes the emblems that Jesus gave to the disciples at Passover, and it's going to distort them. It's going to make the priest as this connection between heaven and earth, that he can just call for Jesus's blood and body, literal blood and body, to be present, so that when a person's eating a piece of bread and drinking some wine, he's actually literally eating the body and the blood of Christ, and that Christ himself cannot resist the call of the priest to do this, that the priest actually has no power over the blood and the body of Christ. So this is a counterfeit. Would we agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So
That way.
yeah. So maybe there are things that we don't fully understand about Daniel chapter 8, that in trying to defend the pioneer view, we sometimes have taken positions that haven't taken into account that the pioneer view was prior to October 22nd, 1844, prior to a complete understanding of the heavenly sanctuary. But what the pioneer view is presenting is that there is two desolating powers: the daily, which is paganism, and the transgression of desolation, which is papalism. And that these two powers are not just persecutory powers, they're not just persecuting God's people, but they are also counterfeiting the work of God in the earthly sanctuary, in the type, and also the antitype, Christ. They're counterfeiting this. And that this was not fully understood. Now, what the new view of the daily tries to do is it tries to take this into account, but in so doing, it undermines the basis for the 2300 days. So we know that if we are going to take this position, we don't understand the two desolating powers, we don't understand the 2520, either for Judah or for Northern Israel. If we don't understand them fully, we're going to have a hard time taking these 2,300 days as an answer to the question of Daniel 8:13 as beginning in 457. Because if the daily has not all been continually going on, that is, that counterfeit has been existing, the answer of how long shall be the vision concerning the daily can't possibly refer to something that began after 31 AD, right? So this is the problem with the new view. Now, I believe that Ellen White in her counsel, when she wanted people to get together and study this, is she wanted them to do what we're doing now, to go back and dig in this and look at it afresh, and not start with these assumptions, not have it as a battleground. Now, Angela says, well, there's daily masses, which is true. But that's besides the point. We're not going to take the daily here in Daniel chapter 8 as referring to anything to do with what we would call the daily ministration. That is, we're not going to take the daily here and use the arguments, well, because the word Tamid is used as in all these references to the daily ministration of the sanctuary, that here it's referring to that. Here the daily is referring to a counterfeit of that. And so the daily is paganism. The transgression of desolation is paganism baptized, but it's not the daily. A reference to the high priest or to the Catholic priests doing the daily mass has nothing to do with it being the daily. So it does have daily things that happen, but that's not applying this word, the daily, that's seen nowhere else in the Old Testament except in Daniel. So this is something unique. This word daily here is not being used as it is other places. And we don't see higher medicine, Crozier using this word or using this verse to argue that the daily is Christ's heavenly ministry. And so we would all agree that the papacy is a counterfeit of Christ's heavenly ministry. And that's really the argument that he's making here. He's not making the argument that the papacy is the daily. So can people see the distinction that of what he's making, the argument that he's making, that we can agree with it? We might have trouble with just this part dealing with the place of his sanctuary, because that's a different interpretation than was understood by the pioneers when they studied Daniel chapter 8. But in saying that, he's not saying that the daily then is Christ's heavenly ministry. So let's see, anything else? Okay, here's one that's interesting. So this is Daniel 9:17, and he's going to talk about the sanctuary here. Daniel prayed, "Cause thy face to shine upon thy sanctuary, which is desolate." This was the typical sanctuary built by Solomon. "Thou hast commanded me to build a temple upon thy holy mount, and an altar in the city wherein thou dwellest, a resemblance of thy holy tabernacle, which thou hast prepared from the beginning." So we know that the sanctuary on earth is a type of the sanctuary in heaven. So he's going to make this argument that there's a sanctuary in heaven, right? So he's making this argument for what reason? Is he trying to present the new view of the daily?
No.
Right. So he's presenting something we all understand as Adventists, that there's a heavenly sanctuary, and that's what needs to be cleansed. So the only thing you could say about Daniel chapter 8 that has any resemblance to the new view of the daily is the idea that the sanctuary that needs to be cleansed is the heavenly sanctuary, and that in some way the papacy has a part to play in misrepresenting the heavenly sanctuary. But we already take the position that Daniel 8 is representing counterfeits of the earthly and the heavenly. It has sanctuary language there, but that sanctuary is not the true sanctuary, right? This is about paganism, offerings that are defiled, that don't represent the sanctuary in heaven. But when it switches, when it asks this question about the counterfeit, so let's go back there and let's look at what's being asked here, because I think there's something that's often been missed. Because he's going to ask the question, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily paganism, which is a counterfeit of the earthly, and the transgression of desolation, papalism, which is a counterfeit of the heavenly, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. So what's the sanctuary here? What would we all say? The sanctuary is what sanctuary?
say Jerusalem.
No, we don't say Jerusalem. We say it's the heavenly sanctuary. Now, the sanctuary and the host, because what we say that this is Kodesh, this is referring to the heavenly sanctuary,
not the earthly,
right? And the host is God's people on earth. And there's a connection between this sanctuary and the host because they are treading down God's sanctuary and his host for the papacy is going to do it for 1260 years. They're going to tread down. And since they're a counterfeit of the heavenly sanctuary, is the heavenly sanctuary, as well as God's people, trodden underfoot for 1260 years?
Yes.
Right, they are, right? Now we know the answer to that is, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Again, this is going to be Kodesh, the heavenly sanctuary that's being talked about. So this question that's being asked only can be understood if we understand that the daily and the transgression of desolation are references to these counterfeits of paganism and papalism. Then this question, the answer to it makes sense. But if you take the view that is held by the new view, and you're going to say, how long shall be the vision concerning Christ's heavenly ministry in the heavenly sanctuary and the papacy, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot, the question unto 2,300 days doesn't make sense. The answer, right?
Yeah, that automatically shifts the focus from AD 31 to 538 and beyond.
Yeah, well, even if you put it to AD 31, if you're going to say that that the daily is Christ's heavenly ministry, I mean, the earliest that you could start the 2,300 days would be in 31. But they would then have to say, well, really, we're going to have to start it in 538.
Yeah, our enemies can do either one at the Sunday law crisis and overthrow the faith of some Adventists.
Yeah. Well, so if they're going to say the daily is taken away at 508, the answer then would have to have been unto 1,335 days. Right?
Right.
So, and then shall the sanctuary be cleansed, or you'd probably have to say 1,336 or something like that. But the point is, this doesn't make sense. This was the problem that I had back in the 1990s when I wrote a paper on the book of Daniel. And I was looking at this problem. I couldn't see, with the idea that the daily was Christ's ministry in the heavenly sanctuary, how this question and this answer fit together. But you can see how it does fit together if we understand not just the pioneer view, because the pioneer view has some problems. That is, they're going to be looking at Christ coming in 1844. They're not going to be looking at the heavenly sanctuary as needing to be cleansed. They're going to be looking at the earth. But once you see that it's the heavenly sanctuary, and that's the argument that Crozier's making, the sanctuary that needs to be cleansed is not the earth or Palestine. The sanctuary that needs to be cleansed is the heavenly sanctuary. So once you understand that, you have to modify some of your understanding of Daniel chapter 8, but that's only natural, because if you believe the sanctuary is the earth, you already have to say that there's something that they missed in this passage. And then you can go back and look at the passage and try to understand it more clearly. And I think that that's what we've done, is we've looked back and seen that this is about these counterfeits. And the answer to these counterfeits, the answer to this question, only makes sense if you understand the counterfeits of Christ's heavenly ministry. because then we can answer it unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. It now makes sense that it's addressing both paganism and papalism, and specifically from a certain point, right? So what Daniel isn't given is the point of where these 2,300 days begin. He's going to be given that answer in chapter 9. But he already knows that paganism, or the daily, has been going on, right? And we can look at that. We can see that the daily, the question to the how long, means that this period of time has already begun. And if it's Christ's heavenly ministry, then we have no way to have this question even being asked. And we have no explanation for the answer. Any thoughts on this?
Well, at the Sunday law, our enemies will be able to use this specious reasoning to ostensibly prove that nothing happened in 1844 and that there's no reason for Adventism to exist. A lot of Adventists won't have an answer.
Yeah. And, and I'm just going through the rest of here of, I know you can't see what I'm doing. I'm just clicking on here, but you won't see him anywhere in this paper because I've gone through this a number of times.
Angela made some notes.
Okay. Yeah, well, one of the definitions for Strong's for Kodesh is saint. Yeah, in this case, it wouldn't be a saint, though. This would be the sanctuary, just the form of the word. So they're not quite synonymous. I wouldn't agree with that. They are different words. So you can't just look at Strong's to understand how to translate a word. So it's a reference to the sanctuary, but there is a connection between the sanctuary and those that are sanctified. That's what a saint is somebody who's been sanctified. So I'm going to read another passage here.
I'm a bit intrigued with this.
Okay.
Because if we're looking at the verse directly.
Okay, so just in Daniel chapter 8, you're saying?
Correct. Yes. So the way that this is being stated is, how long shall be the calzone concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation? Yet
so
later,
5:20.
right, but yet later in the same chapter, of course, this is not the calzone, it's the mare.
Which is the 2,300 days.
Correct. So Daniel is given two visions, two entirely different definitions, and is left to wonder about these visions for an extended period of time. But he comes to recognize that the mare is true, because that's what he's told.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where he's going to be said in verse
down toward the bottom of the chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, 26. And the vision, that's the mare, of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. And that word true is the word emeth.
Okay, but
yeah.
Consider further.
Yeah.
After he is told, and the mare of the evening and the morning, which is told is true. Wherefore shut thou up the calzone.
Yeah, the chazon, yeah.
So the mare is never to be shut up, but the halzon is.
Well, in this context here, yeah, so he's gonna, now this word, he's gonna keep it secret or hidden.
Right.
Yeah,
So the panoramic view
mhm,
of the 2520, of the 21260s,
mhm,
is to be shut up.
mhm.
But the mare, which is still part of a 2520,
Mhm.
is not to be shut up.
In
What
in
can
this
we make?
context here, I mean, the whole book of Daniel is gonna be sealed though. Right, so when you go to Daniel chapter 12, it's gonna use this same word, shut up, right? So keep secret, the words, but it's also gonna use this word khatam, which means to close up or seal. So he's gonna keep these words secret, but he's also gonna seal the book. So he shuts up the words, keeps the words hidden, but he's gonna seal up the book itself for the time of the end. Now, so the point that you're trying to make, though, is that there's something about the 2520 that's more hidden than the 2300 days.
Okay, but is the entire book shut up, or is it just Daniel 11:40 to 45?
Well, I would think that that the book of Daniel is the one that's opened in Millerite history, right? It's the one that's sealed with 7 seals, and it's going to be opened. So I don't. I mean, as far as the time prophecies are concerned, I don't think they're fully understood until Millerite history. But even the 2520, though, is not fully understood in Millerite history. Specifically, the 1260s are not understood.
But I mean, when we're dealing with Daniel 1, 2, and 3, especially dealing with the nations,
Yeah,
that's something that
was understood.
that was understood even before the time of the end.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying just the time prophecies themselves are the main things that are sealed up.
Okay.
Right. But the 2520 is going to be hidden, right? Because that's what the word shut up means.
Sure.
And we can agree that the 2520 is hidden. And more specifically, it's hidden in the week of Christ, right? So in Daniel chapter 9, when you look at this, the 70 weeks and so forth, they're gonna seal up vision and prophecy, right? So there's something about Christ's covenant week that's going to be sealing these things up. But as far as the hidden aspect of it, the shutting up, that's something that's hidden that needs to be dug up, basically. And that's what this movement has done. We've come to understand the chazon, which was never fully understood, either in Millerite history or even in Adventist history. The closest we have is Hiram Edson's understanding of it. So the problem with the new view is it ignores reality. It makes arguments that are specious, right? It's not going to be open and honest and plain. They're going to use weasel words. They're going to misrepresent statements that are made. They're going to try to prove things and make it look like they've proved their point. But if you examine it, you can see that they haven't proved their point at all. And the idea that you can take Crozier and say that he's presenting the new view of the daily is really just dishonest as far as I'm concerned. You know, to say that he talks, I mean, he says that the way that he looks at it is he's addressing Hatamid, And you don't see him addressing Hatamet in Daniel. He doesn't address the daily in Daniel at all in his paper. And he only addresses the daily in the sense of there's a daily and a yearly ministry. So there's nothing about Crozier's article that supports the new view of the daily. And so his whole premise that there was this new view of the daily that Crozier presented, that James and Ellen White accepted, but that Adventists didn't accept because of Crozier's association with the age to come movement that was time setting and reinterpreting the daily as, you know, the daily sacrifice, some kind of literal sacrifice on earth, it is a real problem. And we can also look at, because remember when we looked at Whelan's view of what was happening in the history of the new view of the daily, and part of the problem that Whelan had is he already had accepted some false ideas about the daily. And do you remember what those were? What was his assumption that the new view of the daily was what? It was the old Protestant view. And is that correct? Is the new view of the daily the old Protestant view?
No.
No. So there's just so much misinformation, so many things that even Loughborough concedes that somehow the daily was connected with time setting in the statement in early writings. And yet we can see that there's no time setting in connection with the daily in 1850. That her comments about the daily and her comments about time setting are unrelated. And yet that's the case that they try to make. And Loughborough almost just concedes the point, though he doesn't in any way support of their conclusions. But you can see how this whole situation has been muddied. And it's not like, we can't just go back and say what the pioneers said prior to 1844 regarding Daniel 8 is correct, because we know that they took the position that the earth was the sanctuary. And so there's things that they're missing when they're looking at Daniel chapter 8. Now, people have made further arguments regarding Daniel chapter 8 and positions which I have taken and presented, especially regarding the place of his sanctuary. And I can see that my understanding was not complete in regard to Daniel chapter 8. The one thing that this movement had presented, and Jeff has presented this, is the idea that Daniel chapter 8 is dealing with a counterfeit. That's something that's quite clear. But we also had some mistakes in this movement. Many people took the position that the chazon was the 25-20 for Judah. But we can see that the chazon is a reference to the 25-20 for Israel. People understand what I'm saying by that, or don't understand.
The 25-20 for Israel emphasizes the two phases of the counterfeit.
Right. So it the two desolating powers. Now in Millerite history, they didn't really recognize 723. They looked at 677 to 538 as being this period of time that's connected to paganism, even though, I mean, it's 30 years before 538. And then they're going to take that part of that 1260 and they're going to add it at the end. So you can see that Miller does this. He adds 45 years he takes the period from 677 to 538, which is going to be 45 years short. And he's going to add that to that. So he's going to have in 1798 that this 1260 years that he's going to count for the daily. He's going to put that at the end after the papacy is taken out of the way. Here, I'll show you this. We've looked at it before. So it's going to be Miller's Works here. So I don't know if it's in this book or here. But pretty sure it's just in Miller's Works. Okay, so no, we don't want 815 AD. Unfortunately, he has this here. Okay. This must be it here. No, that's not what I want. Okay, let me try this again. No. Okay. If I can find this statement. No, I can't find it for some. Oh, that's because I'm doing this wrong. I don't know why I typed it. It's 1215. I typed in the wrong number. There we go. Okay, here it is. Okay, if this is the time, when the kings of the earth began to rule over Zion and to scatter the power of the holy people for a time, times and a half, or 1260 years, when will it end? So he's taking Daniel 12, verse 7, the scattering of the power of the holy people, as 1260 years, and he's going to begin that in 677. Okay? He says, I will answer, when all these things shall be finished. First, the kings exercised their authority 677 years before Christ and 538 years after Christ, which 677 added to 538 makes up 1215 years only, which did not accomplish the scattering of the holy people, nor the treading underfoot of the court 42 months, or the 1260 years. And this is the reason why John was not to measure, because it would not be fulfilled until mystical Babylon should wear out the saints and change the times and laws, a time, times and a half. So he's going to say that we have 1260 years for the scattering of the power of the holy people, but that's going to be cut short for 45 years. And then you're going to have 1260 years of papal Rome. So then he says, so he writes long sentences here. Why John was not to measure, because it would not be fulfilled until the mystical Babylon should wear out the saints. I'm going to make this bigger. And change times and laws, a time, times and a half. For God hath put into their hearts of these kings to fulfill his will, and agree to give their kingdom unto the mystery Babylon, or papal Rome, until the 1260 years of mystical Babylon should be fulfilled, which was 1260 years added to 538. So that's going to come to 1798. It carries us down to the year 1798, when the kings again took their power and will now accomplish the scattering of the holy people by reigning from AD 1798 to 1843, which is 45 years, add which to 1215, which the kings had reigned before mystical Babylon obtained the power, and we have a 1260 years of a king's reign. So it's a rather convoluted explanation, but the point is, Miller didn't understand that the 1260 didn't begin in 677, or the time, times and a half of Daniel 12:7. It begins in 723. So this was hidden. Would we agree that this was hidden from the Millerites and is only in this movement being understood. Hiram Edson had a partial understanding of it, so we could say it was introduced in Adventist history, but it wasn't accepted. So I think that we have some of the strongest arguments for the 2300 days than Adventists have ever had because of our understanding of the two desolating powers and the understanding of the daily. Any comments on that? Our time is up, but.
I don't have a direct comment at this point. I'm going to have to think about what you just asked.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So what we can say, what we can at least see, is that our understanding of the daily was incomplete, and that God is still unfolding as we look at the foundation. He's still unfolding light from the past. And if a person rejects the new light that we've been given, that actually makes old light shine brighter. And can we agree that that is the basic premise of accepting new light, is that it makes old light shine brighter?
Amen.
Yeah. And we can see that we're making this old light shine brighter. We're not rejecting it. We're not saying that they were wrong or that we need some new interpretation or application of these periods. We're saying that these periods are correct. Now, we ran into this problem where somebody like Heidi Hikes appears to be doing something similar. He's going to try to retain 508 and 538. And we're going to look at those things, but he's going to try to retain them by this interpretation, a new interpretation of what events we are to mark in 508 and 538. Now, we came to recognize the baptism of Clovis on December 25th, 508 is the best marker or event to show that the daily was taken away in 508, because its symbols not only tie us to the time of Christ, but it also ties us to our history, to December 21st, 2021. And we have all these December 25th that are significant as well. We had the bombing of Nashville on December 25th. What other December 25th do we have? Stephen, do you know what other December 25th are significant?
In 274 AD, you have the sun god, the Solus Deus. Is it, there's a name, maybe it's like a Latin, the day of the sun.
Solo Invictus, are you talking about?
Yeah, that's it. Yes, the temple to the indestructible or invincible sun. The temple is dedicated on that day.
Okay.
In 274, and that's Aurelian.
Okay.
The emperor, he sort of initiates that god as being significant over the other gods, the other pagan gods.
Yeah, because Solo Invictus means unconquered sun.
Yes.
Right. So, and there's also, there is a Sol Indigus, which was a deity. So, but that it's based upon. But it's December 25th, AD 274. So we can see that this has to do with paganism.
Yes.
So you're going to have Clovis baptized. How many years later?
234.
Yeah, 234 years later. And what's the significance of the number 234?
I'm not aware.
Okay.
You have Charlemagne as well in 800 AD.
Okay, and Charlemagne is made emperor on December 25th. Is that what happens on December 25th?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, what other December 25th? Can you think of other ones? Of course, we have 1991.
Yes.
Do we have any other baptisms on December 25th?
You have the birthday of the Pope, Pius VI.
Okay, so Pius VI is
1717, I think.
okay, and
So,
Pius VI is important,
so he's the one that gets the deadly wound.
right? So he's the one that gives the deadly wound. Yeah, I was baptized December 25th. 38 years before the bombing in Nashville. I don't know how significant that is, but it's a baptism on December 25th. So anyway, we have all of these December 25th. We have all of these symbols. We have, that's actually Mikhail Gorbachev formally resigns as president of the USSR in a televised speech on December 25th. So we have all of these symbols, and dealing with the taking away of the daily. But somebody like Heidi Hikes, in doing that, he's going to undermine the whole premise of the two desolating powers. So his new light isn't light that makes old light shine brighter. It actually undoes it. So all new light, all new applications, or maybe details, I wouldn't even say applications, but just details or explanations, have to support what we already understand to be truth in order to be accepted as new light. And we can see that in this movement right now, ideas are being presented that do undermine our understanding of 9/11, for instance. And yesterday in the study, we saw that what you think about 9/11 definitely affects our understanding of prophecy, and that we have to address these things. So we're looking back at the past so that we can understand the situation in the present. And what we're going to try to show is that what we're experiencing now is Millerite history after October 22nd, 1844, by our history after July 18th. And this is going to help us to make decisions. So thanks for all of that. Let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you once again for this study. We ask for your presence throughout this day. Help us to think about the things that we have studied, to understand them. And I pray for each person looking at these things that you can guide and direct their minds. And we ask for your angels to watch over us and protect us from harm. Help us to be faithful in all the things that you put before us each day. We pray this and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.